Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Birth Neoterist space. I am your host, Sabia Wade, and I'm here with a very special guest. Okay, someone I have history with, someone who was gang BADT, still gang BADT,
Oh yeah, always.
just not on the team, but gang, period. So can you please introduce your hair looks so good. I don't know what it's
Thank
giving.
you. I
I don't know
appreciate
if you like did a blowout and you were like and you whispered around.
it.
I don't know, but yes, introduce yourself.
First of all, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm a Merrell. I use they and she pronouns, and I am a former BDT student. I guess always continue to be a BDT student, so current student. And I got to work on the team for a long while, which was really beautiful. But I live in Chicago and am a full spectrum birth worker. I specialize in trauma and in bereavement primarily. But I am primarily transitioning into archival photography of families, especially queer families, which really directly grew out of my work as a birth worker. And I never expected this turn in the road to happen, but it is so cool to look back and see all the ways that being a birth worker led to this moment.
It's like wow, right? Because being a birth worker can lead you to all different types of things. Like right now, I'm in this chaplaincy course,
Oh, wow.
and yeah, and I'm like, what? But also, it makes sense, because I feel like in the work that you do as well, especially with focusing on bereavement and trauma, um, there's always like this kind of like for a lot like and when I say spiritual element, I don't mean that someone's like religious or had like a specific thing, but there's always like an element of like why is this happening?
Mm,
Or what is happening? Or like, those kind of like questions that come up. And so I feel like in spaces people just tend to ask me these questions. So I was like, let me like invest in like something that feels good to me and like also be like more equipped, if that makes sense.
yeah,
But
absolutely.
how did you transition? Like what was the path? Like how do you see that path from birth worker? I mean, still birth worker, but to this how do you call it? Archivalist? I don't
Yeah,
know.
it's kind of called like cultural archival work,
Hmm.
and like cultural organizing. But it really started with I was doing births, attending births left and right, and the folks was working with just started wanting birth photos. So I just started experimenting, borrowed my wife's camera, did not know what I was doing, took the grainiest, darkest pictures of all time the first time. They are fully bad. But it was beautiful. And it sounds very cheesy, but I felt like I was able to see the love in the room better when I was behind the lens. So when I was in front of the lens doing the birth worker work, I kind of had this urgency to be the person doing it in every moment and be the person
Hmm.
that squeezes and being the person giving water. And I had been pretty actively fighting that urge for a long time. But when you're behind the lens, there's no hands. That's it.
Hmm.
You just have
Hmm.
to trust the partner and give the partner guidance to be there. And it was beautiful. Really cool to get to step back, have my hands busy, and just see the love unfold. Um, and so I just kind of dove in. But I took some classes at my little local art school or art center around the corner, and learned how cameras work, which I did not know the first couple
But
times
they
I
are,
did
they are, I have a camera, like a
it was
real,
hard.
you know what I mean? And it's like clickety click, click, wait, this, and this, and this. Like it's a whole science.
It's a whole thing. And I did not know it at all at first. And especially, side note, very hard in birth spaces. It's very hard to take pictures in the dark. So had to learn that fast. But it was just such a beautiful part of being at births. And then transitioning into postpartum work with those same families, they just still wanted their moments documented. And it is really meaningful to get to document those stories with families that I'm close with, and not have like a surface level relationship with the people I'm photographing, which is a really hard part of a lot of photographers' work. Is like by necessity, they often don't have strong relationships with the families.
For sure.
But when you intersect it with birth work, we're buddies.
Can't get no
Know each
closer.
other.
I mean, it's like you know what I mean? Like you're very close at that point, especially when you're with somebody from like pregnancy until postpartum, like you're just there for the ups and downs. You're there for the, if their partner have partners, you're there for those kind of like pieces. You're there for like, okay, everyone, we're gonna keep the love here. We know that everyone's
Mhm.
feeling away, right? Like you're just there for all of that. So can you tell me and us about the Queer Family Archive?
Yeah, absolutely. The archives are a project that I'm working on right now, but it's going to be an ongoing project. I don't have like an end cap for it, where I am documenting queer families and their stories. So it's a mix of family photography, videography, and an interview project. So I start with an interview with the families where I ask them to tell me their story of whatever they want to share. And we also talk about what their dreams for queer family life in our city is. Right now, it's just in Chicago. It'll be in
Mhm.
Baltimore next summer, which is very exciting. So it's going to be traveling around, but really, I want it to be rooted in place. So we talk about the landscape of reproductive health locally here, what family means to them, what their dreams are, and it's for all types of queer families. So it doesn't mean you have to have kids. In couples, polycules, elders, youngins, teens, everything in between. So it's been really beautiful to get to see how we define family as queer people, instead of focusing or allowing the primary narrative to be a dominant culture narrative, especially with how hard of a time it is to see our stories be minimized
Mhm.
and reported
Mhm.
on incorrectly and incompletely um, in the larger media structure. So I really wanted it to be a place where we can tell our own stories.
Yeah,
So
and I'm
that,
also really excited about that part around, like, it doesn't have to be birth related, like, it can
mhm,
be you and your partner, you and your like, your partners, like, you and, like, whatever, like, I think that's so important because, like, in queer communities, we are infamous for creating families, right? Right? Like, right, out of necessity a lot of times, so, like, to be able to, like, document that and also, like, I don't know, just for that to be, like, knowingly defined as family, right? Like,
mhm.
you don't have to be blood related, you don't have to explain whatever, like, it's whatever your family is, I think it's also really good.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is a big thing in photography world that you're a family photographer or you're a couples photographer, and that those are different things. And I think that's a real bummer.
Mhm,
I really
mhm,
want this project to be polycules, to be couples, to be whoever that family is. I've got a shoot coming up that's just one person and their pets, which makes me so happy.
oh my
The stories are
goodness.
important too. I've got a shoot coming up where it's someone in their chosen family is all out of state. So we're going to do a shoot that's them with objects in their home that remind them of their family and can tell the story
Mhm,
of their family, even without their family being present. Um,
mhm,
so it's been really beautiful to be able to get creative about what family means. And that's just like classic queer excellence for our community to be creative and form their families and call
for
ourselves family.
sure.
And
And
so
also, right, like, I don't think it could be denied, I mean, I don't know how you put it in your, like, understanding, but I'm like, I think there's also something really, like, fuck the man about, like, at this time where, like, queer and trans bodies are just being harmed and rights are being taken away and, like, all these things that you're like, "We gonna take some pictures so y'all can
Mhm.
see what we be doing over here."
Yeah,
I think there's also
absolutely.
that
And
element, so I'd love for you to, like, speak to that.
yeah, I feel really grateful to live in Chicago. There's a couple places in the city where trans health, or a couple places in the country where trans healthcare is robust, and there are a lot of providers, and this is one of them. So there are trans healthcare stories being told in the archives, and I'm documenting my wife's top surgery right now. And it's really important to tell those stories of what that healthcare means to us as queer and trans people, how transformative it is. And when I go to other cities, we're going to be talking about their context and telling stories where there's a different amount of access to healthcare, and highlighting the differences in those experiences, I think is really, really important to, yeah, highlight the like inequities that trans folks experience in this country and with trans healthcare being under attack. But overall, outside of healthcare as well, it really just is, it feels like a radical act to tell our own stories in a landscape
Mhm.
where that is so diminished and made quiet, purposefully made quiet. So I want this to be for us. Hopefully it impacts larger narratives of queer families. But first and foremost, this is a family album for us as one big queer family so that we can have our stories right there with us all the time.
When you think so, I know like your work, you dive into bereavement, into trauma, like, you dive into the feelings,
Sure
right?
do.
So in this, right, like when I'm thinking about the archive that you're building, is it also like an assortment of experiences in that as well?
Yeah. If I understand the question, yeah. It I really want the stories to be um as much just in the family's words as possible. So I am the interviews are mostly giant chunks of direct quotes, very little me in them, because I want them to just be the direct stories. So it is the experiences that the families want to tell. Sometimes that's a birth story. Sometimes that is a story about their experiences with bereavement, loss, trauma. Sometimes it's just stories of joy and laughter, and that's so important too. So it really changes depending on the story that they want to tell.
Mhm.
And all the families know and opt into this project knowing that it's going to be a public story. So they ahead of time shape kind of what their family wants to say about their own family. Um, I tend to not include specific stories about adoption details or foster details, since those are, in my opinion, those are the children's stories to tell. So we can kind of tell
Mhm.
the parents' side. We leave any details about those kiddos
Yeah.
so that they can have their own stories later down the road. But yeah, super wide range of experiences. And usually I'll ask one question and then the family just talks for half an hour and we'll see where it goes. And it goes wild places.
And also it's like that doula part of you, right? That's like, I'm here
Yeah.
to listen. Like I'm here to just witness what's going on. I'm not here to like, you don't have to tell me the best story or this kind of thing. I just want you to give me whatever you got to give me and like we can just be with that. So I
Yeah.
think that's also really beautiful. And what was the thing I was gonna say? I was gonna say, oh, so my question was like with the ongoing like world that we're in right
Mhm.
now, what I guess are some goals that you have for the future of this project?
Yeah. So tangible shorter term goals are the archive is public online. I want it to be a thing that's accessible to queer folks to have representation of our own stories and kind of have an online place we can go and be surrounded by community. I'm going to be compiling this into a photo book. So I'd love that to get published so I don't have to like self-publish it, but I'll do it if I need to. And I want that photo book to feel like a family photo album that's our own, even if we're not the people in the book, that's our extended queer family. And to get messy with like dirt and chocolate handprints and popcorn dust from kids. Like, that's the dream. And then I'm also planning to have a small gallery showing of the pictures where all the families in it can come together and meet each other. There's been a lot of ask from these families, but also from my birth worker families, from people I've supported through birth, that they've had a really difficult time finding queer family community in Chicago. So I'm really wanting this to also be something where people can meet each other and build some community. That would be the dream.
For sure. I love that. I also love like the photo album. Cause like I think like especially in our like super digital world, like no one's really like getting out the old school Like,
Yeah,
photo
it's
albums. So,
important.
like, when I'm at my mom's house and I'm like, "Oh, this is the photo album, like, this is the" I can really appreciate that.
Yeah.
So the next question I have for you is kind of, I don't know, it could be it's kind of a big question, but what would you like to see, like, for the future of, like, queer and trans representation, right? Like, what does that
Mm.
feel like to you? What does it look like? Like, what does it include? What yeah, just what would you like to see? Obviously, the Queer Family Archive being a part of that vision, wider vision.
Yeah, that's such a good and big question. Um, I think I'd start by saying that I work really closely with queer and trans teens in my neighborhood. My wife and I co-advise the high school's GSA, which now stands for Gender and Sexuality Alliance instead of Gay Straight Alliance. So I do love that. But yeah, my wife is a teacher at the school across the street. So we lead the club there. And when I think about how I want people to be represented in our community, I think about like their voices, and a lot of them are seniors in high school. So they're about to launch
Mhm,
to their paths. And a lot of them, like some of them want to be photographers and be storytellers and be writers. And I think that's gorgeous. um,
mhm.
Also, obviously, so much of the queer narratives that do get out there are white narratives and cis narratives. And that is not the future of our community.
Mhm.
And that's also in the archives why I want my voice to be as little as possible and have just the families' voices be the focus. Um, yeah, like Black and brown trans voices are going to be the future of queer representation, and that's the way it should be. So whatever I can do to support, especially our local students, to be able to go out and be that voice, and accomplish their dreams of being a photographer too, and being a writer, and doing the things that do shape cultural narratives. That's
I know
so
those I feel like those, like, positions and those that art is so undervalued, but
important.
it's literally like, we need people to document our history, like, we're
Mhm,
living, like,
mhm.
in history, right? Like, we need somebody to do that. Like,
Yeah,
how do we and I think, like, especially thinking about, like, growing up, like, be queer and being like and when I did see it, it was usually white, cis,
mhm.
something on TV or whatever the case is. So I think, like, I'm just really thinking about, like, how important it is also to motivate and inspire and resource, the teenagers that you're talking about, like, with, like, this is valuable work, like, this is important work, like, you don't have to go out and go get, like, a corporate job, like, you can
Right.
do this work because that's gonna be impactful, especially for the longevity of just, like, visually seeing our people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with these narratives, and especially with photography, it's so important for people within the cultures that are being documented to be the photographers. Like I am not going out and doing street photography in my neighborhood because I should not be the person telling the story of my neighborhood here on the south side of
Mhm,
Chicago. Like that is not my move. But like we've got kiddos in the club who love street photography, and this is where they grew
mhm.
up, and this is their neighborhood and their story. So they should go out and do that, and tell those stories and meet neighbors and be able to share their neighbors' stories. That's gorgeous. So yeah, I think those are the things I think of in the future of our narratives. And I know that is like hyper local. I am thinking about like our specific teens,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
but
but
they
I
are
think
part
that's,
of
like,
that future.
important.
Yeah.
That's, like, a whole thing in itself, like, I don't know, I often think about, like, sometimes okay, so when I think about art sometimes 'cause I used to be, like, really into art, actually. When I was, like, in 8th grade, like, I got accepted into, like, a college program, was the whole thing, right?
Wow.
But, like, I think about, like, how sometimes, like, in a neighborhood or, like, in a city, how people forget about the museums,
Mm,
but also the
hmm.
museums, like, tell you so much about what happened before and why it is the way that it is now, right? But it also tells you this art also depicts it in a way for you to actually understand it.
Mm, yeah.
Sometimes, like, reading a book about what happened in Chicago in 1972 is not quite right, but when you see the imagery and you get to see, like, the whole thing, like, how people dress, like, what was the furniture like? What was the decor like? What was on this street that's not there anymore? Like
Mm,
that gives it a whole different feel and understanding. Yeah, I think
I so
about that
agree. Yeah,
often.
I think, yeah, seeing those images are so helpful for us to connect with those people, and especially if their own words go along with that. That's just beautiful to be able to give some dimensionality to the history and context of a place. I did not do much art growing up. I in college was an archival researcher primarily, so that's one of the ways I got into RJ work was I was doing some deep archival projects on like what grassroots reproductive healthcare was like in the 60s and 70s. And it was all like direct archival research work. And it was so cool to pull out and like see that this was the pamphlet that they gave people in that moment. And
Mhm.
this is what they were talking about. And this is the speculum they were using and things like that. Um, so that obviously like is contributing to this work as well.
Mhm.
So I'm kind of coming in at from the other side and like learning how
I
to
love
also be
that
an
though.
artist. Yeah,
And
it is
research is hard.
it is so hard. I did grad school for public health research, and I'm still a on the side. I do public health research about getting cops out of mental health care, but I cannot do it full time. It is too much.
It's so much. Like I've never like been in that like academic space, but like, my people be doing, I'm like, ooh, child. It's important though. It's so important. Like you can't like it's so important, but wow, is it tedious.
It is so hard, so grueling. Yeah, I'm like I can spend 5, 10 hours a week doing this, but I was doing that 40-hour a week researcher life. And even though it was like very community centered and like non-carceral, I was still like, God, I can't do this. I need to do something else.
Yeah,
Um,
you're finding a
and I was
blend, you're
like,
finding the balance between like, because I think it's also like, especially with you being like a doula and a researcher, there's probably parts of you that like want to do the hands-on in
mhm,
person, like, and when you're doing just research, it's like ain't nothing about people coming into it. Like
right. Yeah.
from what I can tell, it's like it's not we ain't doing that part. So I can understand like looking for that balance.
Yeah. And it's been a very winding journey, but I think the balance has been really beautiful of like the research I have done is all qualitative. So it is all talking to people and writing down their stories and helping them communicate their stories. But then they're gone. And that's not community. But these are my neighbors and the families that I see when we're walking in the park, and we get to be friends afterwards. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, it's really joyful.
Well, my last question for you is doing all this work, researching stuff, taking pictures, doing the thing, because it's not just taking pictures, like you have to establish relationships and like, like it's a thing. It's not like you just like snap, snap, and it's done. It's the whole thing. How are you taking care of yourself?
Hmm,
Because
beautiful
also you're doing
question.
the work for the community, but you're also of the community,
Mhm.
right? So it's never like that disconnection. So yeah, how are you moving through? How are you taking care of yourself?
Yeah, I think one of the things I'm doing, which was very, very hard for me to do, is I'm not taking births right now while I do this project. And I felt a whole bunch of feelings about that. And I
Mhm.
felt embarrassed about that, felt guilty about that. But ultimately, it's like what my body and brain needs to be able to focus on this project. Um, and that's hard. But it's definitely felt like a caring thing to do for myself. Um, and I'm really just like spending time at home with my wife, taking care of them after surgery, and trying to do as little like admin work and things that do get me a little down and in the weeds as possible. But I'm also trying to make space for other types of art. Like I am very lucky to get to do art every day through photography, but I'm also doing art with flowers and art with macrame and embroidery and things like that. Right now, I'm working on a series of what I call like little fellas, which are just like cute little bad drawings because I'm not a drawer, but just like little chunky guys with little smiles. And that makes me happy. And to accept that like art can be not quote unquote good. And if it makes me happy, then that is self-care and nobody else needs to see it. But I get to see my little fellas and they get to make me happy.
I love that. Make sure you send me one of your little
Okay.
fellas. I need to get like the actual complete imagery.
Absolutely.
So, how do we reach you? How do we learn more about you? How do we contact Amma?
Yeah. So I have a couple different ways. If you want to email me, that's where I'm most active. My email is Ama Bene Photography. So my first name, Ama AMA, and then Bene BENE photography at Gmail. But I also have I'm on Instagram a good amount. I'm a Merrell.photography. I'm starting a Queer Family Archives Instagram. So that'll have it too. But I also have a website for the archives. It's just queerfamilyarchives.com. And if people are up to donate, I would love that. I have a GoFundMe there. But this is a free project for all the families involved, which is what I really wanted it to be, to make sure that this wasn't representing only the people who are wealthy enough to
You
have
can
disposable
afford to
income.
pay it, yeah.
Yeah. 'Cause right now, photography is a luxury, and I don't think it should be a luxury. I think our stories are all worth documenting, and that's not a luxury item to be able to leave behind a legacy in an archive. So I am not making any money. So this is all grassroots funded. Yes, that's there. But I really love meeting people and getting to talk online. So please email me and be my friend.
I know when I say that, sometimes people are like bullshit. I'm like, no, for real. Like, I'm probably
That's
gonna hit you guys. I
yeah.
look at my DMs. It might take me a minute to get there, but I do look at them. Well, thank you, Amma, for all of your work and all the things that you're doing, and also for asking for what you need. So if y'all can donate, do the thing. And I'm excited to see like more of the images
Mm.
because I don't know. I'm like, I like that. When I look at someone, they tell a story and I like humans of New York kind of thing. Like I'm into that.
Yeah.
So,
Ah,
so yes, thank you for your time. I
thank
appreciate
you
you.
so much. Thank you for having me. It's such a joy to see you. I miss BADT. I know this was like the right step that I needed to step back and focus on this project, but I
Absolutely.
miss y'all. It's so nice to see you. Thank you for having me.